it enough? You need more? Hammy, can you believe that? These people. Well, boy, do I have another hot interview for you. It was so good, Hammy had to watch it with me. And it is about grassroots organizing on the Democratic side. And I picked out these two groups for a specific reason. I picked them out because both of them literally materialized out of thin air post Donald Trump. And I wanted you guys to realize how not easy, but spontaneous, I guess, it is for something to go from an idea to the digital space to reality to literally changing the world just because somebody was pissed off and inspired about it. So what this is an interview with Ezra Levin, who is the co-founder of Indivisible, and Shannon Watts, who is the founder of Moms Demand, which is a part of Every Town for Gun Safety for the Bloomberg organization. But Moms Demand was started separately first and folded into Every Town. But Moms Demand is a gun reform group that has been extremely effective at actually getting gun reform done at the state level, because of course our Congress isn't going to do anything federally. And Ezra Levin's Indivisible is, I think, and I say in the interview, like almost, I mean, really has a lot of responsibility for empowering you, people who are watching this, no doubt, for helping to stop the Republican Party in its tracks, even though it controlled the presidency, the House, and the Senate, from repealing Obamacare through grassroots organizing by teaching people how do you talk to your member of Congress. So I'm really excited to have the interview, have them explain how they started their organizations. Because again, I think that maybe somebody who watches this video one day will find themselves in a situation and realize how easy it is to become a citizen activist and change the world. So let's hear about that and celebrate DNC week with a little grassroots. Now, Hammy, you're supposed to sing some bluegrass now. Ding 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 ding. Help me. So welcome back to the Election Whisperer DNC special. I am so excited now to introduce you to two of the Democratic activist grassroots organizations, I think brightest and best leaders. And they're two fairly recent or new leaders in the party. I think they're just doing some of the most fantastic, forward-thinking and modernized work within the party, and it's supporting cast. So I'm introducing you today to Ezra Levin, who is the co-founder of a group you might have heard of. It's called Indivisible. And I'm introducing you also to Shannon Watts, who created a group called Moms Demand. And Moms Demand is also a part of Every Town for Gun Safety, which is Bloomberg's gun organization. So I'm so excited to have them on the show today to talk a little bit about what inspired them to go from ordinary citizen to citizen activist to creating organizations that are at the national level actually affecting, policy change, getting people elected. I mean, just amazing organizations that are having huge impact and, just a few short years ago didn't even exist. So it's going to be great. And I'm hoping that it inspires other people to action and other people to think about, wow, I could do this. I want, that's really what the goal is, to get people to understand that this is something that happens all the time when people get inspired. So with no further ado, let's jump into it. Shannon, I am so excited when I saw you give your first interview on gun politics, because gun politics for me as a mom has been an issue that has always been really important and really has hurt me a lot in terms of feeling frustrated. Like, why can't we go on the offensive? Why can't we? This is an issue that we should be winning. I mean, it's an extremist position to say, hey, everyone should have an assault weapon, and, people who are domestic abusers must be able to have their, gun access preserved. Why aren't we out there making that case? And then one day I turned on my TV, and there was Shannon Watts, and she was representing this new group called Moms Demand. And I was like, oh, thank God, finally somebody's making a competent argument. And so tell me a little bit about how you went from Shannon Watts, mom and ex communications executive, to Shannon Watts, citizen activist of a very effective organization.
Well, thank you. I was a stay-at-home mom of 5 after having a corporate career, and I was living in Indiana when the Sandy Hook school shooting happened. And that's viscerally where it impacted me, really, as a mom. And I saw these pundits and politicians coming on my television in the hours after saying, oh, the solution was actually somehow more guns. And I knew that wasn't true. I knew that was a lie. I knew nothing about gun violence. I knew nothing about gun legislation. I knew nothing about organizing. But I knew that the country was broken when it came to guns. And so I went online and I looked for something like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which I just thought I would join. And I couldn't find anything. So I started a Facebook page in my kitchen, and I thought I'll just have this conversation with other mothers and women across the country who are feeling the same way that I am. And it has now gone offline and turned into one of the largest grassroots movements in the country. And obviously, so many of us, and many of us white suburban moms, came to this afraid our kids weren't safe in their schools, and then realizing and learning so much more about gun violence and how it kills 100 Americans every single day, whether it's gun homicides, gun suicides, in city centers and rural communities, it's unintentional shootings, it's domestic gun violence, all of it senseless, all of it preventable. And to your point, this being an issue that resonates, I think, with women, our polling shows that that's true. And that, in fact, if you look at the 53% of white women who voted for Donald Trump, gun safety is an issue that can flip them to voting for Joe Biden and Democrats and gun sense candidates going into November. So we are out there having tough conversations in our social networks and families. We're getting the message out. And it's also important to remember the suburbs are much more diverse than Donald Trump believes they are. He keeps talking about suburban housewives, which I don't know any of those. The suburbs actually look like America, and they have since about 2010. They represent the same demographic makeup as the country at large. So if he's betting on the suburbs with his gun extremist message, he's making the wrong bet.
Totally agree. I mean, I have carried Sandy Hook with me every single day since that shooting. Especially as I had I've had 2 children. One was, it was his birthday, actually, the day of the shooting. And he is older teen, but my youngest had just been born. He was 1 year old. And so when he moved on to elementary school, I mean, the first day of school, as I'd watched him walk into kindergarten, I was thinking of Dylan Hoakley and the other children of Sandy Hook. So I know that other moms all across the country are very sensitive to this. And as a public opinion expert, I also know that Republican women display in public opinion data a much, just a quantified difference in gun attitudes from Republican men. So I know that, this is an issue, as you just pointed out, can resonate to them. So tell me then, when you started this Facebook group and it started to take off, at what point did you realize, okay, this isn't going to be like a Facebook forum where we, kind of vent our frustration. This is going to be something in which it's going to be a vehicle for change. Tell me about that realization and how you kind of mechanically moved it from a forum to a movement organization.
That feeling really started right away. I could remember, my husband and I going to bed the night that I started the Facebook page and him looking at me and saying, like, this is going to be a very big deal. And I think I just tapped into the anger and outrage that had been building in this country, particularly among women and moms for so long. Even after Gabby Giffords, I think we all thought, okay, surely her coworkers in Congress will do something, and they did nothing. So, we realized we were going to have to be the people who did something. And so I was getting I never imagined I'd be a public figure. So all my public information was out there, my phone number, my email, my home address, and I was getting letters, emails, calls, texts from women in places like Texas and the Carolinas and Alabama and Arkansas even saying, I want to do this where I live. And none of us knew what this was. We just knew that it was about getting off the sidelines. And we started really organizing on Facebook, chapter pages for each state. And we at the beginning had sort of marches and rallies, but very quickly realized what we needed to do was to be organizing to support good gun laws, to oppose bad gun laws. We thought at the federal level, we really did think, okay, Manchin-Toomey, which was the bill Congress put forward, a bipartisan bill to close the background check loophole in honor of the Sandy Hook tragedy. We thought that would pass and sort of like we could go back to our normal lives. That did not happen. It failed by a handful of votes in the Senate, including some Democratic senators. And so our volunteers, many of whom are brilliant, just pivoted and started doing this work in state houses and boardrooms where they lived. And they found that there were governors who would act in the wake of Sandy Hook, in Colorado, in Delaware, in Maryland, and on and on. And also what we realized was that the NRA was insidious at the state level, and that we would need to spend a lot of time showing up and stopping their bad bills. In fact, we now have a 90% track record over the last 5 years of stopping their agenda, like guns in schools, permitless carry, stand your ground, things like that. And also, going after this from a corporate policy perspective. Women and moms make about 80% of the spending decisions for their families. So when we tell companies like Starbucks and Walmart and CVS and Walgreens that we don't want open carry in their stores, they listen. I mean, we were able to get Subway to change their gun policy about a month ago. So all of this work, it was so much like lightning in a bottle, I think, because we were able to tap into the rage and anger of women who wanted true change.
That's interesting. And, I'll be honest with my viewers. I specifically wanted you to come on the show, not only because of your really fearless advocacy for the position of sensible gun reform, but also because I had a front row seat to what the fruit that could be born if that advocacy was transformed on the front lines. So it's one thing to go to Connecticut, where Democrats already had political power, and kind of deploy that public policy advocacy into friendly territory. But here in Virginia, there was not friendly territory. It was a Republican-controlled General Assembly of both chambers, and your group, amongst other efforts, would have to take control of the Virginia General Assembly to effect change. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did in Virginia, a state in which the only laws that passed after the Virginia Tech shooting 10 years prior to now, give or take a year, were laws that made it easier for people to buy guns, not harder?
Yeah, Virginia is actually one of my favorite stories, and it's really a playbook for November and the years to come. I can remember back in 2013, right after we started, we were having to have conversations with Mark Warner to convince him to vote against an AR or against the NRA's desire to pass something called concealed carry reciprocity, right? So this was not a favorable state for us. It was very much a red state. But we did what I call the unglamorous heavy lifting of grassroots activism. We met with him. He eventually voted no. We met with all of our state lawmakers there. We showed up at every single gun bill hearing. We showed up by the hundreds in our red shirts all the time at the state house. And eventually we became a political powerhouse in that state. And so after the Virginia Beach shooting, there was a special session called. Republicans dismissed it after 90 minutes, refused to vote on any stronger gun laws, and we decided to double down. We outspent the NRA 8-1 in their own backyard. We spent about $2.5 million, but we also outworked them because we have all these volunteers there. We made hundreds of thousands of calls and door knocks, and ultimately, I can remember going into what we call the war room in Virginia the night of the election, and I was told, like, let's be happy if we flip one chamber, and it would be narrow. And we flipped both chambers, not just one, and pretty significantly. And then just a few months later, the governor signed 7 new gun safety laws. And so this is a great example of how you can tap into Black voters, Latino voters, suburban women, create a coalition and truly make significant, substantial change in not too long of a time.
Right, and those laws will trickle down beyond the terrible smite of school shootings, which is of course what triggered your advocacy, to the daily scourge of crime and shootings that are plaguing every metro and urban area, including here in Virginia. But for this mom, what it means is that when my kindergartner came home and we were reading stories one night to go to bed, and he turned to me in the middle of the story out of the blue, as kindergartners are wont to do, and said, "Mommy, teacher says we have to be quiet or the bad man will hear us." And I looked at him and I said, "What?" Because it was so surprising to me. And he repeated himself. And I realized, between my two children, one who was born just after the Columbine shooting and my newest child, that this poor child had been put in a closet and taught how to hide in the dark and be quiet, because for those 10-12 year gap, that's how bad the gun violence scourge had gotten. It was heartbreaking, and I'm so glad that with that moms and the millions of moms that are involved in your group are out there trying to make Virginia and have made Virginia safer. So thanks for that, and I'm so glad to be able to hear a little bit about what you guys did, how you did it, and to hear that actually anyone could do it if they found an issue and a niche for it and the desire for change. So Ezra, speaking of, very similar story to Indivisible's roots, right? Because I know that I've read about a lot about Indivisible, and I've interacted quite a bit with your chapters, especially here in Virginia. So tell us, it's election night 2016, and it's about 11 o'clock, and you have a pit in your stomach. Tell us about Indivisible.
Well, actually, and just to start out, it is so great to hear Shannon's story here. I think it is unquestionable the transformational change that has happened on gun violence prevention in the course of time that I've been involved in politics is due in no small part to the role that Moms Demand has played. I mean, you just look at where we are right now, where it is within the Democratic Party, but also the public at large. I mean, transformation is the word, right? And that doesn't just happen. That happens because of smart, strategic people like Shannon decide to do something, right? And it's just amazing to see. So I'm honored to be on this interview.
I'm honored to be on with you.
Yeah. So election night 2016, know where we were? We were downstairs from where I am right now in our living room for the election night party that we threw to watch the results and celebrate Hillary Clinton's election. So at 11 o'clock at night, I think that was breaking up. There was some yelling, there was some crying. People were trickling out. People were arguing about, the primary or who didn't do enough to knock on doors. Leah and I had, every election, my spouse Leah, we go out and try to find a place to go knock on doors. So we had come back from the week before from the Philly suburbs where we had been knocking on doors, along with many of our friends. So we were shocked and in despair. I remember, so that night I went to bed. Leah couldn't sleep and went starting to make a list of all of the challenges that we faced. And our housemate, Angel Padilla, is a longtime immigrant rights advocate, was working for National Immigration Law Center at the time, was rightly focused on the terror that was coming for immigrants throughout the country. And so we were scared. And I remember I sent out an email 3 or so days after the election to a group of friends. I was a former congressional staffer, as was Leah. I was working on anti-poverty advocacy at a think tank advocacy group. Leah was doing anti-human trafficking work. So we were kind of like in this inside the Beltway nonprofit industrial complex, mid-level managers. So we had been congressional staffers and then turned advocates. And what we were most worried about in the moment, I sent this email out and I said, there are 3 problems. One is, all of the atrocious policies that are coming at us from this administration and this Congress. And that's obviously what we do. We work on these things. We will be fighting back against those things. But the second thing was more scary, which was the rise of white nationalism and fascism in this country. And then the third thing was maybe most scary of all, which is we seem to have a Democratic Party that was totally ill-equipped to respond to this rising fascism and was not treating the moment we were in like a unique moment, but just politics as usual. And I will remember vividly for probably some time, the two events that set us off on the road of writing the Indivisible Guide. One was an interview on TV with a future Trump appointee, in which he was speaking positively about the Japanese internment camps during World War II as an example of what we could do with Muslims and immigrants and refugees. And the second was an interview with incoming Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, in which he was describing how, well, we lost, we're just going to have to, cut deals. Maybe we can work with them on infrastructure. And so there was this really scary, quite potential future of 2017, where the bipartisan agreement was that the roads to America's new internment camps ought to be well paved. And we were shocked. We were scared. We thought something had to happen. And being former congressional staffers, we really didn't have any applicable skills, but we knew how Congress worked. And so we thought, look, we were on Capitol Hill during the rise of the Tea Party. What we can do is try to demystify how Congress works. How did the Tea Party effectively organize grassroots power in order to pressure their members of Congress? They weren't entirely successful, but they were somewhat successful. And right now, what we're up against is, yes, a trifecta reactionary federal government, but they don't have the people on their side. There are more of us than there are of them. If we effectively mobilize and use that mobilization to target our own representatives, we might be able to do some good. And so we started writing the Indivisible Guide around Thanksgiving and tweeted it out, and was shocked that anybody read it, honestly.
Did they read it? Yes, they did, right? Not only do they read it, it starts like, a viral chapter creation and becomes a variable in my model really quickly. So, and not literally, but figuratively speaking, right? So tell me about the moment when you realize, oh my gosh, we've created a thing here. Like, people are seriously, interested in this, empowerment feeling, because I think for many people, I mean, I know personally, the sense of being trapped in despair was overwhelming, right? So this Indivisible Guide, no doubt, for activists probably felt like something that they could grasp and hold on to, that gave them something to do.
Yeah, and actually hearing Shannon's story, it does really remind me. I remember that night, Lee and I went to bed, and it had, like, the guy had gone viral, which was cool. We had just written a Google Doc, and it went viral on that. It was getting press that night, and we went to bed thinking, we did a good thing. Like, this is out in the world. Hopefully this will be useful to folks. And so we thought it was just at the level of a document we wrote was popular. And shockingly then, what started coming in, just flooding in, were all of these emails from across the country, from Syracuse or rural Texas or Alabama, saying, hey, I just read your guide. We're Indivisible Tallahassee. We're Indivisible Montgomery. We just got this Google Doc. What should we do next? Because in the guide, we had proposed people start small local Indivisible groups and call it Indivisible if they would like. Right. I think you are exactly right that the power of Indivisible, and I'm reading into Shannon's story, one of the powers of on demand is it's really a platform. It allows people to come in and say, hey, I want to do something, and it gives you an ability to do something. So what Shannon created was this amazing way for people who maybe they weren't involved in politics, they weren't involved in running for office, maybe they were just on the outskirts, they watched the news, but had never really participated in that way, and they said, wait, this is something I can do. And we experienced that with Indivisible. I will never forget the future Indivisible group leader. She's actually currently running for office from East Tennessee. She created this amazing Indivisible East Tennessee group that became a powerhouse. And I was talking to her sometime in the last couple of years, and she said, what was I doing before 2016? Minding my own goddamn business. And that is true of so many of the folks who came to Indivisible. I think one of the things that makes it kind of magical, it's not made up of the same old people who have just been doing this forever. It's folks who looked at the system, saw it was broken, and thought, well, damn, I guess I got to do something. And what they did is they started an Indivisible group, or they joined Moms Demand, or they did both. Many of them did both, which is great.
Yes, no, exactly. And you know what, in terms of this, intrepid political scientist lecturer from a little liberal arts college and with a little polling outlet running around Virginia, moderating state legislative races that cycle, I keep meeting people, and they're they're telling me, before 2016, before election night, I barely voted, and now I'm running this Indivisible chapter in rural Virginia. It's got 400 members, and I'm running around Washington with a pink pussy hat on my head, and I'm thinking, damn, this election's going to be a bloodbath for the Republican Party. They're going to get wiped out. So Ezra, I happen to think that without your little guide and your idea to put it out there, and then to have the courage, both of you too, to kind of let the centralization go, to be willing to say, here, you guys in Arkansas, Tennessee, wherever, you take this idea and you let it do what you're going to do with it out there. I don't know that the healthcare bill would have gotten killed. Like, in other words, I don't know that John McCain does the 3 a.m. thumbs down, because that grassroots pressure that the Republicans faced really is organized predominantly by, Indivisible and a lot of the disability rights groups that were super, super important too. But Indivisible played a huge role in that grassroots effort to derail the GOP's effort to overturn the healthcare bill. So talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the earliest fights, obviously, that Indivisible engaged in. It's worth remembering that the Republican House had passed a repeal of the Affordable Care Act literally dozens of times. It had passed the Republican Senate once and required a veto from Obama once. And so it was clear that this was going to be a top priority, in fact, the top priority of this unified reactionary Congress and White House. There was talk in November and December that, well, the Affordable Care Act's dead. It's done. Like, clearly they are going to get rid of it. This is the priority. The Tea Party made this a priority. They fought tooth and nail against the Affordable Care Act. It became the rallying cry during the Obama years that this is why they needed to build power, was to kill this. And so not only was there talk that it was dead, there was talk there might be a repeal bill on President Trump's desk as soon as January, soon after he is inaugurated. And so we knew this was going to be a fight, and it wasn't necessarily a fight that we were going to win. We thought that the only thing that could work would be if people mobilize as much as possible in their own communities and focus on their own representatives. They've got 2 senators, they've got 1 representative. Make sure that they know that their constituents are watching. And so that was the plan from the get-go. The first tactic that we used was the congressional recess in February. So as many of your watchers and listeners probably know, Congress takes mini vacations. They call it congressional recess, where they go back home and they talk to constituents. Often these are kind of boring affairs. The same 4 people show up every time and have the same concerns. Every once in a while, a big issue is raging, and it becomes a little bit more contentious. And we knew that during the long congressional recess in February of 2017, we needed to ensure that people were making their voices heard. And so we spent January and early February preparing the groups for that. And what came, the Republicans in Congress were totally unprepared for, because there was just a massive uprising across the country in, yes, blue states and city centers, but in rural areas and ex-urban areas and red states. You have videos of Tom Cotton being just surrounded by people in Utah, Chaffetz, being surrounded by constituents, thousands of constituents who are demanded that they represent him. And, yes, John McCain played a role. He had that famous thumbs down, but I think it's a mistake to just focus in on just John McCain or just a handful of senators or just a handful of representatives. There were a series of victories that succeeded in either delaying action in the House, which was successful for several months, or ensuring that Democrats used the full power they had, the procedural power, especially in the Senate, to delay. That was a fight, didn't happen automatically. For ensuring that at different points in the process, different Republicans in the Senate voted no on different proposals. So this was not we got John McCain and therefore we won. That's the clean version of the history.
Right.
A months-long, dragged-out fight where there were setbacks and there were victories and then setbacks. But it was
the one that I needed to use to get Shannon out at her hard stop at 3:45, though, Ezra.
Sorry, indeed.
Yeah, I think the power of grassroots, whether it's Indivisible or Moms Demand Action or any other group, is about showing lawmakers something that you have to do over and over, which is, if you do the right thing, we'll have your back. If you do the wrong thing, we'll have your job. And
There
I
you go.
understand that people want revolution overnight. I get it. It's not the way the system is set up. And sometimes it is incremental change that leads to revolutions. And it is the hard work of activists on the ground that is never seen. And I always use the example of my daughter, who is 23, she's gay. She cannot even fathom a world in which she was not allowed to be with or marry her girlfriend. And that's good. It should be that way, but you don't get there that way. It's decades of hard work and heavy lifting on the ground. It's the point of activism. And eventually it does lead to revolutions, whether that's changes in healthcare laws or changes in gun laws. It's all a part of our obligation as Americans, even if we don't consider ourselves activists, but we have to get off the sidelines and get involved.
I could not have said it or wrapped it up better than myself. And what an important message to get across this week of the DNC, especially. So thank you so much for closing it off that way, Shannon. And thank you both for joining and telling us about your organizations.
Thank you.
Great to be here, Rachel. Thanks.